I live near Statistica in Baku. I saw there, as the new Central Park was laid out and established in the city, it's become a great space of recreation, but it came at the cost to a community which has now been spread to all parts of the city. Salam, mijn adım Sean Barry'dir. Ben Yeni Zelanda'dan ve 23 yıl Baku'da yaşıyorum. Ben orta mektebin müellimiyim. Salam. So, firstly, thank you to Akinji for asking me to come and speak. I'm not really an expert on anything particular, as many of your speakers are, but I think what I might be able to offer the audience are just my reflections on 20 plus years living in Baku. So really I had no knowledge of Azerbaijan as a nation or as a people at all. My knowledge of what's now the territory of Azerbaijan was within the Soviet Union. Growing up in the 1970s and 80s in New Zealand, with the Cold War going on, I saw the Soviet Union just as a monolith, as one country, as Russians. That was the Cold War propaganda that we received in New Zealand. So I had no knowledge that Azerbaijan as a nation existed. And my first understanding that Azerbaijan was indeed a nation and existed was through BBC World Service Radio and listening to reports of the First War in Karabakh in the 90s. I remember listening in 92, listening about Shusha. So this completely changed my understanding of the region and of Azerbaijan particularly. So I researched, I read, I went to the library. There was no internet then. By expanding my knowledge and understanding, I learned that Azerbaijan existed as a country within the framework of the Soviet Union. And then, of course, as the Soviet Union had then collapsed, the chance to travel to this part of the world was a real possibility. Before that, travelling to the Soviet Union seemed a dream, an impossibility. So I found myself in Turkey in 1996, working there, teaching English. And at the end of a year's teaching, I tried to come to Azerbaijan, but the visa process was rather involved. You had to get an invitation, you had to book a hotel, and without the internet, that really just wasn't possible. So instead, I did go to Azerbaijan, but I went to the Azerbaijan in Iran, and I ended up staying with an Azeri family in Tabriz for about a week. So that was my first real introduction to Azerbaijani culture. But I was determined to come and visit here, and in 2000 I was working in Ireland. I saw an advertisement for a teaching job here in Azerbaijan, so I jumped at the chance, went for an interview in London, and 3 days later I was on a plane to Baku, and then here I was. So my first impressions of Baku were great. I immediately loved it. I found it really charming. I thought that the city itself was beautifully located on the bay, on the Caspian. Architecturally, it was rich. It had the Cheryshehr, all the first oil boom architecture, plus the areas around Beshmetebe, Sovietsky. These were all areas where I walked, wandered for a long time, talked to people, and got to know the city. So I felt immediately at home here, really enjoyed it, and I threw myself into understanding Azerbaijan, learning more about it, learning about the culture and the people. So in 2000, Azerbaijan was still transitioning away from its Soviet past, but the one thing that was apparent at the time was people were optimistic, and that was a really positive thing. I think people felt that there was, or there would be, a great future once the money from the oil projects began to come online. having said that, there was one shadow, I think, that was hanging over the country, was the shadow of Karabakh and the injustice that people felt about what had happened in Karabakh and the way that Azerbaijan had been treated, the way that the rest of the world ignored it or was ignorant of Karabakh, that whatever world attention was directed towards support of the other side, towards the support of Armenia, and that having transitioned to democracy, that really the forces of democracy in the West were at best indifferent, at worst had no desire to right what people saw as a significant injustice. And this, I think, really stung people. They felt hurt and abandoned by the so-called West. And there was a feeling of isolation, that they were being left to deal with this alone. And that was the one shadow that hung over people. When you talk to people, when I talk to refugees from the region, when I talk to anyone in Azerbaijan, that was the thing I think that stung the most. But still, there was this optimism that the country was moving forward, moving ahead, the economy would grow, and that life would eventually improve. And of course, at that time, the economy was not in the strong state it is now, so jobs were hard to find for many people. Money was often hard to find for people. But the one thing that struck me about society was the way that families supported each other. If someone in a family, in an extended family, was working, they were willing to support all of their extended family to make sure that if they were fortunate enough to be working, if they were working in the oil industry, for example, if they got a job with a foreign company or an NGO, they were willing to support the rest of their family. And that's something that, coming from the West, where maybe we're a bit more atomized as people, we're more individualistic. Here, the collective, the way that people were willing to support each other, was something that was really refreshing. When I looked around the city and the country, when I travelled, I could see that it was desperately in need of investment in infrastructure. Because of the shortness of money, there was no opportunity for that at that time, but also you could see that for 20 or 30 years of the late Soviet period, there had been no investment. So the water network, the electricity network, just the state of schools, hospitals, all the things that governments would spend money on were desperately in need of investment. But then once 2006 came and the oil money came online, the oil projects went live, so to speak, and the amount of money in the economy increased and increased rapidly, then that was the real transition in Baku and the country. You could see the infrastructure started to improve rapidly. The whole landscape of Baku as a city completely changed from being a low-rise city. All of a sudden, the skyline was covered with cranes. Wherever you looked, there were cranes. So this was the building boom, and buildings sprang up all over the city. So you could see there was the fruit of the hydrocarbons, of the oil, of the gas, was being spent on development in the country. And as I travelled the regions, you could see also there money was being spent there. And when I crossed the border into Georgia, and I contrasted the state of things in Georgia with Azerbaijan, you could see that the country was moving ahead day by day. And that, I think, has continued over the 20 years I've been here. The economy's grown year on year. Year on year, the face of the city has changed. And along with that, people's tastes, people's desires, people's aspirations have changed. When I came to Baku, finding a place to get a cappuccino or an espresso was quite difficult. Now in Baku, you can't walk 5 meters without there being a coffee shop where you can go to. The way people have dressed naturally has changed. As the world's come to Baku, I think Baku and Azerbaijan have gone out into the world, and the way people have dressed has changed. When I came, you would still see aerodromes occasionally in the street, Papak, Dublonkers, on a Sunday or a Saturday afternoon in Fountain Square. people would parade around, men would wear suits. That's something that's gone now. You don't see men wandering around on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon wearing suits. So dressing has become more casual. People wear jeans, t-shirts, these kind of things. So in that way, there's been you could say maybe a homogenization of the way that people look and dress, or the food they eat, those sorts of things that the country has adopted habits from the outside. Sushi, for instance, you wouldn't have been able to find a sushi bar in Baku when I arrived. Now sushi's everywhere. So that's how it's changed. Maybe to look at where the country is now, I think you can see a confident, economically strong country with a great future that has positioned itself in the world in geographically a very interesting neighbourhood between Iran, Turkey, Russia to the north, and it's positioned itself to really take advantage of its geographical location, also its natural resources, and that you would expect that in the coming decades that it's only going to grow economically, but also that its profile in the world might become even more. Even though its profile has raised over the years with international events like the European Games, the Formula One, and other sporting or cultural events. We have COP29 coming up, of course, which will bring a lot of attention to Baku. Maybe that will be an opportunity for Baku and for Azerbaijan to increase its profile in the world. While it is known in the world, certainly far more than when I first arrived, it's often framed within its Soviet past or with its oil and gas resources. So if you read about it in the international press, if you hear about it in the media, it's former Soviet Republic, oil and gas rich Azerbaijan. That's what you hear. But this is not really a three-dimensional picture of the country, its people, its culture. I think there is a rich culture here that even though there is knowledge of it in the world, it can only increase, of Azerbaijani literature, music, and language even, that can go out into the world, and it can increase. Where does Azerbaijan go in the coming decades? What are the perspectives? What are the prospects for the country here? It will be really interesting for me to see where it goes. In the time I've been here, I've seen it transition away from the Soviet economy into a market economy, the expansion of the oil sector, of course, but then also year on year the growth of a service sector. So you would imagine that will only increase as time goes on, as maybe the oil sector as a whole part or a greater part of the economy may reduce as other sectors rise up around it. What will that mean for people's aspirations, tastes and desires? How will that transition to a service economy change the work environment and the employment prospects for people? So part of that may also be, I know the country is actively trying to move away from the oil and gas sector into looking into increasing renewable energy. And I guess we can see that will be a focus this year when COP29 comes to Baku, and the eyes of the world will be here. I think one of the things that maybe Baku and Azerbaijan can look at as now a city and a nation with global attention on it is that transition to a greener economy, and maybe also focusing more on the environment in the country as a whole. So if we just take Baku as an example, Baku is one of the cities in Europe or Eurasia with the least amount of green space. From what I understand, the average within Europe for most European capitals is around 40%. Now, of course, they're not all like that. I think Paris is down around 20%. Some of them, Nicosia and Cyprus, is as low as 4%. But Baku is not much better. It's only around 5% of green space, which I think when we think of the overall well-being of the inhabitants of the city, and it is the biggest city in the country by far, that lack of green space does have an effect on the quality of life and also the health of the citizens of Baku. Now, the World Health Organization says that deaths from pollution, and particularly from particulate matter, PM 2.5, the small particles that are in the air from predominantly from traffic, from cars that are using combustion engines. This can be a causal factor in from anywhere from 3 million to 9 million deaths in a year. Now, predominantly this is in East Asian and countries, but I think it's fair to say that when there's no wind in Baku, that the air quality is not always great. So as Azerbaijan investigates the transition away from a hydrocarbon economy, I'm sure it's always going to have a place as a gas exporter, as an oil exporter. It's going to be a key part of the economy. But for people's health, as Baku transitions to renewable energy, that alongside that, if as part of that transition, there could be a transition away from the use of motor vehicles, particularly combustion engines, away to maybe electric vehicles. We see electric scooters all over Baku now. And then also maybe even away from motorised transport altogether towards an increase in public transport. When I came to Baku, there were still trolley buses, there were trams. They were very old, from Soviet times. I know that the new city plan has recently emerged. I know there is talk there of maybe restoring tramways, maybe trolley buses or other public transport, expanding the metro that's there, adding light rail, might be a way to improve the quality of life. I think everyone who lives in Baku has had to come to terms with the traffic problem, that getting across town with traffic is often an issue in rush hour, particularly when school is in. When there's no school, it's easier. But when school starts, then we have traffic jams to catch there everywhere. And getting from one place to another takes time. So that affects the economy, it affects people's quality of life. The air that we breathe could be cleaner, and it would be nice if, as the city develops, that we could have more green space. And that can sometimes be a double-edged sword. I live near Statistica in Baku. I saw there, as the new Central Park was laid out and established in the city, it's become a great space of recreation, but it came at the cost to a community which has now been spread to all parts of the city. There was a great project, the Mahele project, that documented how that community has been, that was very tight and very close-knit, and it was an area that I always, having lived in Yasamal all my time in Baku, I walked through there all the time, and to see that community sort of pulled apart and separated was something that was quite painful to watch, and I'm sure very painful for them. So now the city has better roads, it has a great asset in that park and that green space, but it's come at the cost of a close-knit community. So how we transition as the city grows, and I say we because I'd like to think of myself as a citizen of Baku, having lived here for 20 years, and I'd like to live here, I think, for the rest of my life, that how we as a city can transition and make the place more livable with more green space, so that we maybe have easier access to the Caspian, to the boulevard, where we could maybe walk from the city centre down to the Caspian without having to cross major roads. If we could find a way to prioritise public transport, to prioritise pedestrians over and above the use of private motor cars, I think maybe that could make the city more livable. And I'm aware that I focus very much on Baku. I think that's often that people often think when they're talking about Azerbaijan, talk about Baku, but of course there's so many other regions of the country, and I think all those regions have fantastic tourism potential. I think the The opportunity for growth in the tourism sector for ecotourism is massive. The regions, be it the mountains in the north, the forests in the south, in Ustara, are just wonderful. And I know that the Trans-Caucasian Trail, hiking trail, has been established. I think the opportunity to expand ecotourism, to bring tourists from all over the world here, is a huge potential, and that too, servicing those tourists when they come, they go out into the regions, visiting villages, is a great way to spread the economic benefits of tourism right out to the regions, not just have it here in Baku for the bigger hotels and so on. So I think spreading tourists out to the regions so they get to see how beautiful the country is and all its beauty is really another opportunity for growth for the country.